Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats, we really need to get the program underway. We're being joined by our friends at the World Bank and Dr. Kim in Washington, D.C. Please take your seats. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Could everybody please take their seats? Good morning, everyone. I know better than wait till everybody stops talking, but you got to wait till most stop talking. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I know this is supposed to be a networking session, but I guess I'm asking you to stop networking just for a couple minutes. So good morning. So I've got the privilege of welcoming all of you to the second day of the Global Philanthropy Forum Conference. And I'd also like to welcome back our web audience. And if you're live tweeting at this event, the hashtag is GPF14. As you probably know by now, the Global Philanthropy Forum is a project of the World Affairs Council. And I'm Peter Robertson, and I'm chairman of the board of the trustees of the World Affairs Council. Actually, I've got the best, albeit unpaid job in the world, because as chairman, I get to take credit every day for the amazing work that Jane Wales and her remarkable team do. It's a real privilege to work with these folks, and so I think Jane and her team deserve a round of applause. I'm sure they're going to get several, but I hope you enjoyed the first day of GPF yesterday. I got to say, I thoroughly enjoyed the program. The downside for me was that I learned that if you're over 60, you're considered old by this group. So that was kind of downside. On the upside, I'm a proud 43-year veteran of the oil and gas industry. That's upside for me. And I was delighted by the presentation on beach art that was made by the Langs. I realized for the first time that my petrochemical business extends into the art world. And that we not only supply your transportation and heating fuel, but we also enable art. So who says we can't do it all? Yesterday, we were introduced to two tracks of the conference: Planet, the Earth's changing physiology, and People, changing demography. And as we learned about the various challenges, such as planetary and demographic change and the challenges that these are bringing, we also worked together in the working group sessions to turn these challenges into opportunities. And we're able to continue this dialogue about smart, sustainable development this morning with a very special guest. Dr. Yong Kim, president of the World Bank, will be joining us by video today. I can tell you in the back room, it's been getting that video to work has really been something. We're only 5 miles from Silicon Valley and we've been stretched. But anyway, it's working. So soon after Dr. Kim became president in July 2012, he announced a set of sweeping changes to align the staff, the finances, the priorities of the global institution to meet the twin goals of ending extreme poverty by 2030 and boosting shared prosperity for the bottom 40% of the population in developing countries. He said at the outset, he said, no more business as usual. Trained as a physician and an anthropologist, Dr. Kim has received several awards, including a MacArthur Genius Fellowship, and he was named as one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. Dr. Kim will deliver some short remarks and be interviewed by Tom Kalil, Deputy Director for Technology and Innovation for the White House Office of Science and Technology. So please join me in welcoming Tom to the stage. Hey, Tom. And now, with a little bit of luck on the screen, we're going to see Dr. Kim, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. So, Dr. Kim, welcome to the GPF. We look forward to hearing from you. And remarkably, I see you on the screen. So I'll leave it to you, Tom. Over to you, Tom.
Please, Dr. Kim, get started.
Great, thank you. Tom, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? I'm hoping that you can.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure to be with you today. The theme of this year's forum, Global Goals, Citizen Solutions, really gets to the heart of the approach we're taking here at the World Bank Group. Last year, we announced two ambitious goals that are now the central purpose of everything we do here. First, to end extreme poverty by 2030, and to boost shared prosperity for the poorest 40% in every developing country. Our goals are fundamentally about making change in the world. Fundamental change, we believe, is possible. I know because I participated in some really remarkable changes myself. On a personal level, I was born in Korea in 1959, and back in those days, there were really only a few thousand Koreans who dreamed of being, or even knew what it was like to be part of a global middle class. Today, the vast majority of Koreans have joined the club, and Korea's GDP now ranks 25th in the world at $31,000 per capita, ahead of Spain, Italy, and New Zealand. On the year that I was born, the GDP per capita of Korea was lower than that of Ghana. Today, poor people around the world have very high expectations for their future, and especially for their children's futures. Everyone can see how everyone else lives on their smartphones, on their village TVs, at the movies, and they want to be part of it. In Uttar Pradesh in India, I visited the largest and also the poorest state in India, and I watched as villagers in Uttar Pradesh were watching Korean soap operas on their smartphones. The poor want to join the middle class they see in Korea and the rest of the developed world. They want their children to grow up healthy, to get a good education, to get a job, and live lives of dignity. Lifting people out of poverty is critical, but we also know it's not enough. Countries must address the poor's aspirations to join the global middle class, and countries have to address inequality. We've already seen what happens when they don't. People go to the streets to express their frustrated ambitions. How are we going to address the aspirations of the poor that are rising every day? I think this forum has it absolutely right. Citizen solutions. Or to put it another way, citizens are the solutions. Citizens have to be involved in everything from project design to implementation and the evaluation of effectiveness. As my World Bank colleague Sanjay Pradhan told you yesterday, we've committed to mainstream citizen feedback in 100% of World Bank Group operations whenever we can possibly do it. It won't be possible, though, without strong participation of civil society, especially from many of you represented at this forum. Listening to the aspirations of the poor, though, isn't enough. We have to invest in their futures in things like healthcare, education, and social protection. Investments in people not only help the individuals we serve, they also help economies grow and countries prosper. The Lancet Commission, in a recent study, found that between 2000 and 2011, 24% of economic growth in low and middle income countries resulted from improvements in health. And a 2010 study found that even small improvements in countries' academic achievement, represented by the PISA scores, the so-called Program for International Student Assessment, result in substantial long-term economic gains. One very participatory way to get the poor involved in their own development is through conditional cash transfer programs. These programs provide monthly payments to poor families based on certain conditions. For example, sending children to school or to the doctor for checkups. Investing in people also means creating good jobs which provide an income and a stable future for their families. The private sector is responsible for 90% of all jobs in developing countries, and our research shows that good jobs are the primary way that the poor lift themselves from poverty. Finally, our investments in the future of the poor have to be sustainable. We know that climate change could reverse hard-won development gains and push millions of people into extreme poverty. Creating a sustainable economic future for the poor is an investment that benefits all of us, including our children and grandchildren. Philanthropy plays a crucial role in development, and we need your knowledge, experience, your networks, and resources to address the aspirations of poor people around the world. We're already working with you on things like early childhood development, financial inclusion, healthcare, from increasing access to immunizations to strengthening health systems, women's and girls' empowerment, urban sustainability, food security, and a host of other challenges. We'd like to expand our partnership with you so that we can better leverage each other's strengths. For the World Bank Group, that means learning from the philanthropic community's broad, global, regional, and local knowledge and expertise. From your capacity for long-term and flexible financing and willingness to take risks, and from your ability to reach very different audiences than we can reach through the World Bank. We have a lot to offer you too. Global reach, strong research teams producing world-class data and statistics, the potential to scale up pilot projects, and the ability to influence policy by bringing governments to the table. We hope that by working with you, we can achieve more effective and lasting development solutions. We know that for many of the toughest global problems, eradicating poverty, bringing prosperity to the poorest, tackling climate change, none of us can do it alone. We have to work together, and we must have more citizen engagement. That's an area where foundations have vast experience. 1/7 of the world's people now live on $1.25 a day or less. If we work together, we can help 1 billion people lift themselves out of extreme poverty and create a more sustainable future for all of us. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a conversation with everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for those inspiring remarks. I want to pick up on one of the issues that you've talked about in your speeches, which is the need to have a social movement if we're going to achieve the World Bank's goal of eliminating extreme poverty by 2030. One usually doesn't associate the World Bank with promoting and encouraging social movements. So what role do you think the philanthropic and foundation community can play in making that happen?
Well, you know, Tom, we've known each other for a while, and you know that my background is that I participated a lot in social movements, and I have had the great good fortune of participating in some of the most successful ones in recent memory. I was very involved in the movement, first of all, just to tackle the problem of HIV/AIDS, but then I was involved in the movement to bring HIV treatment to everyone. And I remember when we started just how impossible everyone thought that movement, the movement's goals were. And now we look around and, you know, a short decade ago, people were still saying that it would be impossible to treat anybody in Africa with HIV, and now over 8 million people are on treatment. And it's hard to imagine that Africa would be in the situation that it is today with growing economies, a lot of hope, a lot of optimism, if we hadn't tackled what was thought to be an impossible problem. So I really believe in social movements, and the key for any social movement is that you have to have participation and engagement with everyone. There's a role for everybody in a social movement to end poverty. You know, I had the great opportunity to have an audience with Pope Francis, and I'd been working in Catholic-based communities in Latin America, you know, where he lived and literally grew up, and so we had a great conversation. And I asked Pope Francis whether he would join us in this movement to end poverty, and he said and he repeated just a very simple phrase. He just kept saying, "Cuenta conmigo, count on me, count on me." So if we have the Pope and the World Bank working together on a movement to end poverty, everyone can participate, and we count on you.
Great. Your other major goal is shared prosperity and growing the global middle class. What role do you see for impact investing? What role can the IFC play in supporting more inclusive capitalism? And do you think you have the incentive structure right for the senior IFC management to focus on growing the global middle class?
Well, you know, Tom, one of the big things that I've taken on as part of our change process one of the highest priorities has been to bring the public and the private sector work together. You know, we've been working in the private sector, not many people know this, since 1955. And the private sector part of our work has grown from a very small percentage to now almost half of what we do. Last year, the IFC's overall lending and investments were over $23 billion. So it's getting almost to half. And you know, when I came here to the World Bank, I had some sense of how important the private sector was, but that has just exploded for me in terms of understanding just what we're facing. If you take all of official development assistance and put it together, it's around 125 billion a year. Now that sounds like a lot to some, but compared to the needs, in Africa alone, we have 100 billion a year in infrastructure needs. If you take just the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they have about $1 trillion a year in infrastructure needs. So the official development assistance won't even begin to touch the infrastructure needs of you know, the most important countries in terms of our development goals. So there's no question that we need the private sector. And the question really is, how do you grow the private sector in a way that creates good jobs for people, that creates a kind of growth that's more inclusive? We have seen what happens when you have GDP growth without inclusion. I mean, this is a huge part of what made the Arab Spring happen. So I think that the interesting thing is now there's a lot of data that suggests that the higher inequality that you have in a country, the slower and less sustainable economic growth is. I mean, this is one of the things that's been coming out of IMF. Olivier Blanchard, the chief economist of the IMF, and the IMF has been known for years as being quite skeptical of programs aimed at reducing inequality. They have been absolutely clear, especially in the last year. We have got to address this question of inequality. And so for us, the good news is that there are things that governments can do in terms of structuring public policy, improving the business environment, and then there's a lot of opportunity for what you call impact investing, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when people say to me, I mean, other organizations have openly questioned me about why I'm focusing so much in the private sector. And for me, it's really quite simple. It's not a question of whether you embrace the private sector or you don't embrace the private sector. For me and for the World Bank Group, it's a question of what our aspirations are for poor people. If our aspirations are poor people stop at ODA, then our aspirations are very, very low. If all we're doing is dividing up foreign assistance, our aspirations are very low. But if we say to ourselves, we need to make sure that every dollar of assistance that we provide directly is going to then translate into a growing private sector that creates good jobs for everyone, then the impact is much, much greater. So if you have high aspirations for the poor, you've got to start thinking about how the public and private can work together to create the future that we all want. Now, you know, having said all that, we've got to face the specter of climate change, and we've got to get serious about finding ways of growing inclusively that at the same time helps us to stay below 2 degrees Celsius warming, which you know, could happen from some estimates as soon as 2030.
Great. I wanted to ask you one question about the role of science, technology, and innovation in promoting global development. And a lot of the major opportunities are global public goods. So I'm thinking of things like agricultural research, the development of vaccines for AIDS, TB, and malaria. Is there a role for the World Bank in supporting the development of those, given its traditional focus on country-based lending? How can the World Bank play a role in defining, prioritizing, and mobilizing the finance needed for these global and regional public goods?
Well, you know, we are involved. We've been involved through the CGIAR, the greatest institution that provides funding and support for agricultural research. We have a research group, our development economics group, that has been providing some of the best data on poverty and looking at economic trends. We continue to have a very robust research agenda. The part, Tom, that we want to be even more involved in and make our contribution is, I think that our greatest area of relative strength is that we have both produced and been the best consumers of data and evidence about how to take existing technologies and actually making them work in the countries. You know, we here at the World Bank now talk about a science of delivery. In other words, if you just look at healthcare, I mean, there's no question we need new drugs for tuberculosis and malaria. We need better vaccines. There's no question that that upstream work, a lot of it being done by the NIH, but a huge amount of it being done by the Gates Foundation, that's all really critical. But one of the things in recent conversations that I've had with Bill Gates, a big issue though is that once these new technologies come on the scene, how are we going to actually get them to the people? In other words, no matter how good a new technology is, it's worthless if it doesn't actually get to the people. Right. And the problem of actually delivering it is probably the most important or the most difficult part. You know, for me, delivery is the real rocket science of global development work. And so we're especially going to focus on bringing our expertise together to come up with innovative ways of actually solving problems. So much of development this is what you should do. And what we want to get really, really good at is this is what you should do. And these are the innovative ways that particular goal has been reached in all of these different settings. And prior to this new, the change process that we've gone through, what was happening in one region of the world was actually not spreading to another. So we want to really be your partners, and we want to also capture the innovation that the philanthropic world is in the middle of, and be in a position to spread these all over the world. You see, Tom, I think the upstream research is critical. I think we don't have enough of it, and we're going to contribute as much as we can. I think in the area of looking at better ways of doing agriculture, climate smart agriculture, better ways of providing alternative sources of energy, better ways of building cleaner, more livable cities. These kinds of, the upstream research is still necessary. But the research that almost never gets done is that in-between stuff, which says, here's a technology, here's what to do, and here's how to actually make it work in all of these settings. Right. Being a practitioner myself, having put together programs to tackle tuberculosis and HIV, for me, it's just all that experiential sort of how-to knowledge that doesn't get captured well. We want to be the best in the world at capturing it, and linking that to the upstream research is, I think, the way we're going to get really transformative results. At the end of the day, we got a little more than 15 years to end extreme poverty. It's going to be tough. Great.
We have some fantastic questions from the audience. And the first one is from Mirza Jahani of the Aga Khan Foundation. And she asks, under your leadership, we're seeing greater attention on citizen engagement. This is welcome, and we're pleased at the Aga Khan Foundation to be working with the World Bank on the Global Partnership for Social Accountability. What is your vision for the bank's role in supporting citizen engagement, which you mentioned in your remarks, and what are your limitations given that governments are really central partners to your work?
Well, we're thrilled, and we're very grateful to the Aga Khan Foundation and others as well, Rockefeller, Ford, Soros Foundation, have also supported this. It's critical. We are absolutely committed to continuing to have greater citizen engagement. Again, it's something we haven't been known for at the World Bank Group. And so, to declare that whenever possible, 100% of our projects are going to have citizen feedback, that's a big step for us. So we see that partnership growing, and we're going to do everything we can to bring citizens into the discussion. I think also what we're going to find is that the earlier we bring citizens into the discussion, the quicker and the more effectively we're going to be able to deliver at the end of the day.
The next question is from Chet Tazesky with RTC Impact Fund, and he notes that in a recent interview with the Alliance magazine, you said that in the 90s you were on the street protesting against the World Bank. Now you lead the organization. Do you think you have more potential to create meaningful social change for poor communities in the developing world as a protester or as the president of the World Bank Group? And how has your history as an activist informed what you're doing now?
Well, so just look at the results, right? So I was part of a movement called 50 Years is Enough. 20 years ago, we thought on the 50th anniversary of the World Bank and the IMF, as a big birthday present to the world, we should just close the two institutions. Now, I'm actually very glad we lost that argument. And part of the reason I'm so glad we lost the argument is I actually think we had an impact. I think the fact that Jim Wolfenson was president a few years after I started in that movement, and he told me that it had a big impact. And they started doing things like listening to the poor more, citizen engagement, and it's evolved. Our big argument back then was it seemed that the bank and fund were only focused on GDP growth and not focused on investing in people, and it was true. But now the evidence is overwhelming. The evidence I gave you from the Lancet, the evidence is overwhelming that investing in people is actually one of the most critical parts of spurring sustainable long-term economic growth. So we've won, and there's no question. This is Tom. Jim Wolfenson told me that this is the best job in the world, and that Robert McNamara, one of our long ago predecessors, said that this job is so good that even if you had to pay to do it, you'd do it. I have to say, every day waking up in the morning, I walk through the front door of the World Bank and I look up to my left, and it's inscribed on the wall, our dream is a world free of poverty. It's hard to have a better job than to wake up every morning and go to work fighting poverty.
Great. Our next question is from Ed Kane with the Hilton Foundation, and he asks, in your recent speech at the Council on Foreign Relations, in which you spoke about the World Bank's twin goals of ending poverty and helping the poorest people share in the wealth, I was struck by the fact there was no mention of the post-2015 development goals. Given that you've spoken about the urgent need for partnership, how do your goals fit in with the wider development agenda, and what role should foundations play?
I think the foundations have to have a critical role to play. I work very closely with the UN Secretary General. I'm involved in lots of different activities. The Sustainable Energy for All. We work on learning for all. There's many things we do, and this is the Secretary General and I travel together. I mean, we went for the first time to the Great Lakes region. We went to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We went to Rwanda and Uganda together. And when we landed, the Secretary General said to me that they looked in the history books, and that trip that we made together was actually the first time in history that the UN Secretary General and the World Bank President had ever traveled together. So our relationship couldn't be closer. And of course, we're following very carefully. Our role, and the role that the Secretary General just asked us, me and other heads of the multilateral development banks to lead, is to begin a conversation about how we're going to fund the Sustainable Development Goals. The first set of goals were more or less a conversation around how we're going to divide up official development assistance. And again, that's $125 billion a year. So if that's all we are trying to do the next time around, I think, again, our aspirations will be way too low. So we're now starting off in a process where we're looking at the right combination of official development assistance, foundation support, private sector involvement, and come up with a much more complete picture of what we might be able to accomplish, what our aspirations might be if we took into account all the potential for funding. And at the end of the day, the magnitude of our aspirations will in many ways be determined by the closeness with which we cooperate, but also it's going to be determined by how much we can make it clear that investing in the development of Africa, of South Asia, is going to be a good investment for the private sector. We've got to find ways to make it a good investment. Personally, you look at the infrastructure opportunities in Africa, and there are tremendous opportunities in which you can give poor people energy, reduce the cost of energy for those poor people. I mean, in Burkina Faso, they're paying 75 cents a kilowatt hour for energy, which is about 7 times what we pay in Washington, D.C. And we can give them more power, we can reduce the price, and we can also provide a return to investors. That's the kind of win-win-win situation we've got to be looking for, and that's what's going to make, I think, the Sustainable Development Goals even more impactful than the Millennium Development Goals.
Great. Our next question is from Saad Ibrahim with the Ibn Khaldun Center for Development Studies in Cairo, Egypt. And he asks, when will the World Bank open a third window for lending to civil society organizations in developing countries?
The thing about me, and you know, all of the people who are in that room working in philanthropic organizations, all of you have a board. Now imagine this. Imagine if your board consisted of 188 member countries. And imagine that that board lived with you every day. I have over 200 people representing the 188 member countries who live and work inside this building, meet 3 times a week. Right? Now, if we want to do something like create a new loan window, I'm going to have to discuss this with my board. And you know, it's an issue that has been raised. But as you can imagine, there are some countries that are very open to the notion of developing a stronger relationship with civil society. There are some countries who are skeptical of the notion of civil society to begin with. So I think it's an interesting idea, and it's one of many that we very well could consider. But you know, it's changing something like that will be just about as complex as the makeup and the functioning of my board.
So given your track record, it should be a piece of cake. One last question, and that is that you've been working on this notion of a science of delivery for a while with your work when you were at Partners in Health and at Harvard. Do you see some early success stories that show us that we really can create a science or at least a craft around delivery?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mentioned conditional cash transfers, and that's probably the one biggest success. You know, Mexico and Brazil had such great success with the 2 programs, Oportunidades and Bolsa Familia. And now we've taken it to 18 countries in Latin America. We've taken it to dozens of countries all over the world. And even when there were no conditions attached in the poorest countries that just didn't have the administrative infrastructure, we've seen really positive effects. And so that's one example. But what we know, you know, I just had a meeting with our water team, our newly formed water team. And there are 3 basic things that you need to do to be able to use less water and get higher crop yields. And I asked my team, so how many countries are actually doing those 3 things? And they said you could count them on one hand. So you know, it's not so much that we're telling them what to do. What we now need to do is to say, if the goal is that every country in the world that needs to use less water and have higher yields, if we want them to do this, what would we as an organization have to look like to be able to help every single country implement these great innovations that have been proven elsewhere? You know, it's taken time. I've been saying it every day almost for 2 years here, and I think people are beginning to catch on. And the great news is that here at the World Bank Group, we have 1,000 economists, 2,000 PhDs overall, in a context of about 12 to 14,000 on any given day employees. And these folks are people with PhDs who know the literature, who have the analytic skills, but who've also been doing things in the field for 10, 15, 20, 30 years sometimes. So that combination of brilliant people with analytic skills, with a lot of experiential knowledge, I think is going to form a foundation for this science of delivery. But this science of delivery is going to be entirely open. I know there are many people in that room who have precisely the same kind of experience, both analytic capacity, you know, great depth of knowledge in the field, and hands-on experience. You know, we just haven't been serious enough about turning that into an organized field. It's not a discipline. It's not a discipline in the classic academic sense. It's a field. It's a set of problems that we can solve much more effectively if we tackle it together. So you know, it's an open invitation to everyone in the room to be in touch with us and to work with us to develop this field so that we can rapidly scale up the innovations that we know are already effective. You know, one very good friend of mine from WHO said to me, you know, who had been working in the field of tuberculosis for years, he said, Jim, you know, I'm so tired of pilot projectology. When are we ever going to get to scale upology? So that's what it is. We're going to be focused on spread and scale of great innovations. We're focused on trying to develop new innovations ourselves in areas where we can be helpful. We'll support basic research. But I think together, if we take much more seriously this part of actually delivering value to people on the ground, I think we can make rapid progress.
Great. Well, Dr. Kim, thank you for your vision and your leadership and your willingness to engage this audience and the great team that you sent out to engage the philanthropic community. So please join me in thanking Dr. Kim.
Thank you. Thank you very much.